Chapter 11. Surrounded. "The Germans are attacking!" The cry went up into the night, and the men panicked. A mob formed within moments. Men who had barely spoken since half of them had abandoned their brothers came together in a rush towards the gates. The sudden attempt to escape the camp took the officers by surprise. The night sentry stood before the knot of panicked men on the point of bolting themselves. "Let us out, you bastards!" Someone screamed from within the crowd. That was all it took to urge the throng forward. The sentries shouted warnings, but the men's fear of the Germans they imagined to be descending upon them overrode any other consideration. Only the timely arrival of Caesina was enough to halt their advance. The general forced his way through the men and took position in front of the camp gate. "Stand!" The general's voice came out in a rasp, still heavy with the weariness of the day. He cleared his throat. I heard him working what little saliva he had left into his mouth before trying again. "Stand where you are," he commanded. "I hold you by your honor and oath. There is no attack, nothing to merit concern. How Roman soldiers could be so frightened by noises in the night, I do not know. Are you women that you would run from the first crack of a log in the fire?" He stepped forward and the crowd stepped back. "No, you are not even women, because women would have sense enough to stay behind the walls. You are children frightened by the sounds in the night. Children who are ready to run to your deaths rather than stand and fight those who have harmed you and torn your brothers from you." Many of those in the crowd hung their heads. A few men at the front started to shift forward, still eyeing the gate. The general's sword rasped against its sheath as he drew it. The malcontents froze, eyeing their commander. "If you still want to come on, it will have to be through me," the general warned. "While I'm alive, these gates stay shut." The centurions had worked their way into the crowd by that time, and their voices rung out, dispersing the mob. Marcus and I watched it all from a distance. We were part of the group that had recaptured the frightened horse that had caused the whole disturbance. One of the centurions approached and whispered in Caesina's ear. The general pointed in our direction. "You see, it was nothing. A horse escaped in the night, and you let your fears get the best of you." He stared hard at the shamefaced men. "This is the second time I have seen cowardice in my men." He glared around him. "But I have seen bravery too. What will I see tomorrow when the Germans do come? And they are coming, make no mistake. Will you offer them your backs or your swords? It cannot be both." He let the words hang. Beyond the walls, German voices lifted in song again, filling the silence. "Those who can should get some sleep," the general said grimly. "The rest, prepare yourselves to fight, and get that horse stabled again. Atratinus, Libo, we have work yet to do." My master and the other officers gathered at the general's order. The loss of the baggage had robbed the general of his tent, so they planned under the stars. I was too tired to do more than lie at the edge of their firelight. This suited all concerned, since Caesina was not so fond of me as Silius. I dozed fitfully, too worked up by the tension in the men around me, and the noise from the hills to attain more than Lethe's banks, let alone the dark bliss of Somnus's cave. I did my best to find sleep despite the distractions. A true fighter understands the necessity of rest. It would matter little what the men said to each other. I understood the situation in my bones. We were trapped. All we could do was save our strength and come out snarling when the time was right. Numerius Pulcher sat next to my master on a borrowed horse. His usually well-shaved face was dark with stubble, and the shadows seemed to pool under his squinting eyes. The whole company was drawn and expectant, waiting for the dawn in a future that balanced on a dagger's edge. Marcus crouched low in the saddle behind one of the few tents that had been salvaged from the baggage train. Our group comprised every horse we've been able to pull together. "What if they don't attack?" Pulcher asked for the third time. Marcus looked up at the growing light on the horizon. "It will be soon now. If they are coming." "And if they don't attack us here? Now?" I heard something close to panic in Pulcher's voice. Irritation flashed over Marcus's face at the repetition. "Why do you ask questions that you already know the answer to?" My master's tone was measured, but somehow I found it even more disturbing than Numerius's. Marcus's strained stoicism brought home how close to disaster we must be. He outlined our position as if he was reading a quartermaster's report. "We don't have enough food to wait. If they don't come to us, we'll have to break camp and try to make it back to the Rhine." I gave a low whine and he shot me a warning look. "We barely made it this far, leave alone fighting all the way home." Pulcher looked grim. "I've a wife who would like to know if I fall." He turned dark eyes on Marcus. The need in his face was painful to see. "Not official policy for soldiers to marry," Marcus observed. Pulcher looked pained. Marcus relented. He gave a slight nod. "But I will let her know if needs be." Pulcher drew a golden torque from the pouch at his waist. "Had it off a barbarian on one of the raids. You'll see it gets to her, Marcus." "If it comes to that." Marcus scratched behind his ear. My advice is don't die so you can give it to her yourself." "It's a good reason not to die, I suppose." Pulcher's face relaxed. He looked as if he was staring at something far away. "She's got blonde hair, you know, pale as wheat that's been too long in the sun. The gold will suit her well." "May you live to see her wear it, brother," the man on the other side of Pulcher said. Marcus was about to speak when I heard the first movement from beyond the wall. I pricked up my ears and looked in the direction of the sound. "Seems the general judged them right," Marcus said, regarding me. "They're going to try and take the walls." As he spoke, a cry went up from the hills around us, and the whisper of advancing men turned to the thunder of a charge. I heard them rush in, advancing under a pitiful shower of javelins. They crossed the ditches with ease, pouring over the outer defences and throwing themselves up our walls. Within minutes the tribesmen were inside the camp, yelling in exultation at their easy victory. The legionaries on the walls gave only token resistance before breaking in a shameful panic. The officers bellowed and berated them, but the same cowardice that had broken our formation out on the field seemed to be at play again, and the soldiers melted away almost as soon as the first blows rang out. A large man led the charge, his pale hair wild and his eyes full of fire. Just his presence seemed to put the troops on the wall to rout. "Arminius!" The word escaped Pulcher's lips as a murmur. I had no idea of its significance, but I knew an Alpha when I saw one. Legionaries streamed back into the camp, with the Germans in hot pursuit. As soon as they were over the wall, the tribesmen spied what little we had salvaged of the baggage. The negligible defence had inspired the contempt, and they once more focused on the booty rather than the smaller Roman men who seemed to be of such a little account. Legionaries cried out to each other, trying to form a defensive line against the advancing tide. More Germans poured in to bolster their numbers. The tall warriors laughed at the thin line of resistance. Axes beat against shields and spear tips dropped, lining up for the killing blow. "Hold," Marcus ordered the riders in a fierce whisper. I quivered, wanting to go to my pack's aid, but I knew better than to question Marcus's orders. "Steady." Some of the others were as eager as I, it seemed. The German ranks advanced on the overmatched legionaries. Arminius pointed with a spear and the tribesmen closed the last few feet. Metal rang against metal, shrill notes that would begin the battle's inexorable tune. All at once the Roman shields clacked together, and the wavering line firmed. The music had begun in earnest. Trumpets brayed over the German ululations, an iron note of defiance. On either side of the abandoned wall, men sprung from their hiding places. They cut into the flanks of the strung-out tribesmen with ruthless efficiency. This was not the cloying chaos of the swamp, but Roman units fighting on firm ground, cornered and determined. The blades pumped like pistons behind the locked shields. Too late the tribesmen remembered the ruthless efficiency of a Roman advance. Javelins flew from the walls, spearing the enemy or robbing them of shields. A second trumpet call. Marcus straightened in his saddle and urged his horse on. We became the head of a thundering tide. Our cavalry hammered into their divided force, and while the infantry held the reclaimed wall against the German reinforcements, we sowed confusion and panic in those unfortunates who were already within our walls. Skulls burst and bones cracked. The thick, wet sounds of meat being sliced and the screeching clang of metal on metal echoed from the camp walls. The calls of victory turned to shouts of protest and disbelief, then to outright screaming. Ahead of me, Marcus opened up the stomach of his first victim, leaning out of the saddle at an angle to cut low at the man who had barely had time to turn around and face him. Marcus's sword left a streak of gore as he used the momentum of his first strike to raise the blade high, then bring it plunging down on the tribesman to his left. His officer's steel rung as it sheared through the iron and leather of his enemy's crude helmet. The stench of shit and carrion soon joined the earthy smell of drying mud and fearful men. The wings from the dark were beating once more. I saw the blurred flickering of light and dark. The howling echoed through the confusion around me. The rhythm was taken up by men about to die, unwilling members of that dread chorus. Bitter cold swept in from the other world. Once I would have shivered, but it did not touch me any more. The darkness and the numbing chill were things I had grown used to. I flew at the first man to raise a spear against Marcus, bearing him down with sheer weight. He was quick enough to put his arm between me and his throat, but I tore at him just the same, slicing through the sinews and forcing him to cry out in anguish. He lunged at me with the knife he'd drawn with his other hand, seeking my heart, but I was too quick. I leapt back, and before I could renew my attack, the hooves of a charging horse decided the issue. I paid the man no more mind and ran to Marcus's side. It was dangerous to run between the horse's hooves, but I did it nonetheless, biding my time behind the protection of the riders and springing out when I saw my moment. The second man I claimed was barely full grown, only a few hairs poked from his child's face. He sobbed like a babe when my teeth locked, and I worried the meat of his thigh to bleeding ribbons. He didn't know enough to bear the pain and try to strike back. It was a lesson he would never live to learn. I stopped counting past those first two. The butt of a spear in my shoulder knocked me off the next victim, and after that someone struck me with a knife. Not enough to slow me up much, but enough to put me in a foul mood. I bayed and snarled, shoved and bit, all the while following in Marcus's wake, taking those he didn't have the time to finish or punishing those who might do him harm. The German advance had become a full-scale rout as they sought to escape our trap. Arminius had already broken for the walls, paying dear in followers for his escape. As if by magic, the exhaustion and despondency that had gripped the camp was washed away in a tide of German blood. We hacked and cut and bit until the numbers within the walls thinned. Then we threw open the gates and poured out. Half the tribesmen were already in flight, and now we drove hard into those who had still been trying to gain the walls and save their fellows. The dry ground served us once again, and our cavalry slammed against them with full force. Run or stand, it made no difference. We cut down the brave and the cowardly with equal enthusiasm. Those who did try to run soon found the mud served to slow them just as it had us. Marcus and the other horsemen easily outpaced them. I cannot tell how many fell between Marcus and my efforts. I chipped a tooth at some point, but I barely felt it. My jaws were numb and my legs trembled, but I stayed with Marcus through the day until the light began to fail, and the broken remnants of the tribesmen's forces were able to crawl back to the hills. It was the wildness of our charge that led me into trouble. So many had gone down without even striking back that I was not ready when one of the big tribesmen rounded on me. The German was quick for all his size. The first I knew of it was when his heavy hand slammed into my head, sending me sprawling. Marcus wasn't so far away, so I still didn't understand my danger. I rose barking, cursing him for having the gall to strike me. If I hadn't worn myself out in the pursuit, I might have avoided the spear. The weapon hit me high in the shoulder, severing muscles and laying me open to the bone. I knew not to show an enemy weakness, but I yelped then, screamed. Marcus came to the sound, pushing his horse through the mud and facing the stubborn warrior. One look at me lying bloody in the mud and he threw himself bodily at the big tribesman. To his credit, the German withstood the impact and even managed to keep his feet. But strong and quick as he was no match for Marcus's anger. Marcus drove the officer's blade right through the German's teeth and out the other side of the barbarian's head. It was so quick that the tribesman's body took a moment to register that it should fall. Marcus flattened the wretch's nose as he set his boot against the man's face to tug free his sword. He sheathed his weapon, then he turned to me. The cavalry and the troops surged past us, but our battle was over. Not that I knew we had won at the time. I tried to stand, but the dimness was in both eyes. "Ferox, are you okay, boy?" I felt lightheaded. I told my foot to go down. There was only pain, and the next thing I knew I was face first in the mud. He was beside me then, trying to soothe with words and stroking my head. "It's okay, boy. Lie still," he told me. I whined even though I knew he liked me to be quiet. I don't think he was angry, but something stirred in his stony features. He lifted me in his arms, and I did my best not to react to the fire that shot through me. The horse was not far away. He caught its tether and started to march back through the mud to the camp. He was breathing hard when we got back. I was heavy, even though I ate less in those days. I was dimly aware of entering the area set aside by the medics. Marcus set me on the ground, and I saw there was bloody work being done all around me. The wounded who had been lost with the baggage carts had been partially replaced by the men injured the day before. Even battles won have their casualties. I stared into the eyes of one of the men laid on the ground next to me. The spear in his shoulder had had its shaft cut away, but the iron poked out from the swollen flesh. The man didn't seem to be able to stop feeling it. He lay there curled up around the pain, and every so often a trembling finger brushed the edge of the livid wound, or even felt the metal as if he couldn't believe that this was happening to him. I could understand that. We shared something, that man and I. We both knew the other world was close. Night was coming for us both, but by the time anyone returned to check on either of us, only one of us could see the stars in the darkness. "I'm not paid to work on animals," a voice protested above me. The dead man's eyes were still pools reflecting the moonlight. "For what I've paid you, you'll work on Pluto's cock," Marcus snarled. Light hovered on the surface of those staring caverns, but it would never reach the bottom of the endless shafts of the world beyond. The dead eyes yawned before me. I felt no fear. "I'd assumed you wanted special attention for some friend or comrade. This is a dog. Why does it matter? Gods, it's not unknown to set them ablaze and point them at the enemy. You can't seriously expect me to waste my time on this when there are men dying." Steel whispered against leather, and the surgeon drew in his breath sharply. "Stop him bleeding, or you start," Marcus said. Rough hands grasped me, and I squealed then growled against the pain. "If he bites me, I'm not doing anything." "Ferox." My master's voice froze me, and I let the pale man probe my wound. "I'm no farmer or kennel master, but if this was a man, I'd save him a slow death and slit his throat," the surgeon said. "Do what you can," my master replied stubbornly. I protested as the strong hands pushed down. "First thing to do is stop the blood flow. This cut is long and deep, so it will have to be held closed," the surgeon said. Only my master's presence held me still as he pushed the wound closed and stapled the edges shut with metal pins. "Now he must be kept still," the surgeon said, "though how you will manage that I don't know. We'll no doubt break camp soon and we'll have no space on the carts for dogs." "I'll deal with that myself," Marcus replied. I heard the clink of coins before I slipped into sleep. I awoke to the pain of being lifted onto a litter that had been tethered behind Marcus's horse. There were various improvised stretchers all around me, as the legions did their best to move their wounded. Many men gave me dark looks, but only one man was brave enough to question my place on a litter out loud. Marcus's reaction to him was enough to convince others to leave well enough alone. For a stoic, my master could be disturbingly emotional when he had the mind to be. We limped and crawled our way through those marshes. I hated the litter and would have escaped it if I could, but Marcus walked beside his horse, watching me all the way and preventing me from moving. He shared what little food he had, doting on me in a way that he hadn't even done with Ceyx. I don't doubt that it was the spectre of his dead friend that made him so concerned for me. Marcus had no intention of losing me. It was thanks to him that I lived to see the chief's own wife greeting us as heroes. When we reached Vatira, we were told that our delay had caused talk of destroying the bridge there, to prevent a full barbarian invasion. Agrippina would not have it, and she had insisted on holding on for us. So it was that she had welcomed us back with her child by her side. It was no wonder the legions loved them both. They had shown loyalty and faith when even our own faltered. Though something about the boy made my hackles rise. The men called him Little Boots, for he was hardly more than an infant. I did not like how young Caligula's eyes lingered on my wounds.